Ever notice how a certain version of you keeps popping into your head lately? Not in a fantasy way. Not like wishful thinking. More like a quiet pressure. Maybe it's the you who finally leaves. Or the you who speaks up without rehearsing. Or the you who isn't exhausted by pretending anymore. And what's strange is how urgent it feels. Not rushed. Not chaotic. Just persistent. Like it's tapping you on the shoulder when everything goes quiet. You could be brushing your teeth, driving, lying in bed staring at the ceiling. And suddenly, that version of you feels closer than it ever has before. Here's the thing. This doesn't usually happen when life is falling apart. It happens when you're stable enough to notice something's no longer aligned. And real talk, this feeling messes with people because it feels mystical. Like a signal. Or a calling. Or some parallel version of you trying to get your attention. But what if that urgency isn't coming from outside you at all? So what's really happening here? Here's what makes this experience confusing for a lot of people. The urgency doesn't show up as panic. It doesn't scream. It doesn't overwhelm. It lingers. People describe it as a low hum in the background of their life. A sense that something is slightly off, but not wrong enough to point at. You're functioning. You're productive. On paper, things might even look fine. And yet, there's this repeating thought. I could be living differently. I'm not behind, but I'm not aligned. There's another version of me that feels closer than it used to. What's wild is how common this is, especially among people who are reflective, self-aware, or emotionally intelligent. It often shows up after growth, not before it. After therapy. After burnout. After a quiet realization that your old motivations don't work anymore. And the mind does something interesting here. Instead of presenting a clear solution, it presents contrast. You start noticing people who represent a path you didn't take. Old decisions replay, but without regret, more like curiosity. Moments where you think, if I chose differently back then, I'd be someone else now. This is where people get stuck. Because the feeling is real, but the explanation feels slippery. Some try to suppress it. Some romanticize it. Some panic and make impulsive changes just to relieve the pressure. But here's the truth most people don't hear. This urgency isn't a sign that something is wrong with you. And it's not a sign that you're missing your destiny either. It's a pattern. A psychological pattern that shows up when your internal model of who you are starts to lag behind who you've actually become. And once that gap appears, your mind will not stay quiet about it. The question isn't why this thought exists. It's why it feels louder now than ever before. And here's where it gets interesting. Okay, so here's what's actually going on, without getting academic or weird about it. Your brain is constantly running a model of who you are. Not who you say you are. Not who you want to be. But who your mind believes you are based on patterns, behavior, emotions, and repetition. Think of it like software running quietly in the background. Every decision you make, every habit you repeat, every emotional response you reinforce, it all feeds that model. And most of the time, it updates slowly, subtly. You don't notice it until the model changes faster than your conscious identity can keep up. That's when this parallel self feeling appears. Not because another version of you exists in some cosmic realm, but because your brain has already simulated a new identity state that feels more accurate than the old one. Here's the key idea most people miss. Your brain doesn't wait for certainty before preparing change. It prepares first, then sends urgency. And urgency is just emotional salience. It's your brain saying, pay attention. This matters now. This is where cognitive psychology comes in. Your mind is a prediction machine. It's constantly asking, what's likely next? What version of me fits the environment I'm moving toward? When the prediction changes, attention follows. That's the role of the reticular activating system, your RAS. It's the filter that decides what you notice and what you ignore. Ever buy a car and suddenly see that exact model everywhere? The car didn't multiply. Your attention tuned to it. Same thing here. When your internal identity model shifts, even slightly, your RAS starts highlighting thoughts, memories, people, and possibilities that match that new version of you. And get this, because identity is emotional, not logical, the signal doesn't feel like information. It feels like pressure, like urgency, like something knocking from inside your awareness. That's why people describe it as a calling or a signal. It's not language-based. It's sensation-based. Now here's where people get tripped up. They assume urgency means danger or time running out. But psychologically, urgency usually means neural readiness. It means certain pathways in your brain are now strong enough to support a different way of being. Before, the idea of that other you felt unrealistic. Too risky. Too far. Too abstract. No. It feels reachable. Not because the world changed, but because you did. This also explains why the thought feels oddly calm at the same time. There's tension, yes, but not chaos. That calm is coherence. Your brain recognizing a version of you that actually fits. Now let's talk about memory and emotion for a second. The mind assigns importance through emotional salience. Thoughts that carry emotional weight rise to the surface repeatedly. So when a parallel self-thought keeps returning, it's not random. It's emotionally tagged as relevant to your future self-concept. This is why suppressing it never works. You can distract yourself, but it comes back stronger in quiet moments. Because your subconscious isn't asking permission anymore. It's already running the update. Now, here's where mystical language enters, and we ground it in psychology. People call this synchronicity, seeing signs, feeling guided. But look, what's actually happening is alignment between attention, emotion, and identity. When those three line up, your perception sharpens. You notice patterns that were always there, but invisible before. Not because the universe changed, but because your filter did. This is also why the feeling often arrives during stillness. Not crisis. Not chaos. When the nervous system calms, subconscious signals rise. And the most important part, this urgency isn't asking you to act immediately. It's asking you to recognize something. A version of you that is no longer hypothetical. It's psychologically available now. And once that happens, your old identity starts feeling outdated. Which brings us to the deeper layer of what's happening beneath awareness, and why this feeling doesn't fade on its own. Now here's where it gets really interesting. Now here's where we go beneath the surface, because everything we've talked about so far is only the top layer of what's happening. Up to this point, you've mostly experienced this urgency consciously, as thoughts, feelings, repeated mental images. But the real work, that's been happening below awareness for a long time. Your subconscious doesn't think in words. It thinks in patterns, predictions, and emotional outcomes. And long before you consciously think, I could be someone else, your subconscious has already been asking a quieter question. Does this version of me still work? That question doesn't come from dissatisfaction alone. It comes from mismatch. A mismatch between who you've become internally and the identity you're still living out externally. Here's the thing most people don't realize. Your subconscious updates faster than your conscious self-image. Your conscious identity is conservative. It likes familiarity. It resists change because change means uncertainty. Your subconscious, it's pragmatic. It adapts as soon as new patterns prove more efficient, safer, or more aligned. So while your conscious mind is saying, "This is fine. This is normal. This is who I am," your subconscious may already be saying, "This version is outdated." That's where the urgency begins. Let's ground this with real examples. Example 1. The career shift. Someone works in a job that once felt meaningful. Over time, they grow emotionally, intellectually, psychologically. Their skills evolve. Their tolerance changes. Their values mature. But externally, nothing changes. At first, the discomfort is subtle. Boredom, restlessness, a vague sense of underuse. Then one day, seemingly out of nowhere, a different version of themselves appears in their mind. Confident, purpose-driven, energized. And suddenly, staying feels harder than leaving. That's not fantasy. That's the subconscious recognizing that the old identity no longer fits the environment you're prepared for. Example 2. Relationships. This one hits deeper. You can care about someone and still feel misaligned. Not because they're wrong, but because you've changed. People often describe this as feeling like they're outgrowing a relationship. What's actually happening is identity divergence. Your subconscious notices that the behaviors, communication patterns, or emotional dynamics required to maintain the relationship don't match who you're becoming. So it introduces contrast. You imagine a version of yourself who feels more open, more authentic, less constricted. And that image carries weight. Urgency appears because the cost of staying misaligned is rising. Example 3. Emotional maturity. This one is subtle but powerful. You might notice you no longer react the way you used to. Drama feels exhausting. Certain conversations feel shallow. You're not better than others, but you're different. And the parallel self here isn't flashy. It's calmer, quieter, more grounded. But once your subconscious stabilizes at that level, it becomes uncomfortable to keep performing an older emotional identity. So again, urgency. Not to escape, but to integrate. Now let's talk about the conscious versus subconscious layers directly. Your conscious mind wants clarity before action. Your subconscious wants alignment before comfort. That's why this feeling doesn't come with instructions. It comes with pressure. Pressure isn't a command. It's feedback. It's your system saying, "There's a version of you that feels more coherent than this one." And coherence is everything to the nervous system. When identity, behavior, and environment align, the system calms. When they don't, tension builds. This is also why trying to logic your way out of the feeling never works. You can explain it away, rationalize it, stay busy, but in quiet moments, late at night, early mornings, it returns. Because your subconscious isn't convinced by arguments. It's convinced by fit. Now here's an important reframe. People often think this urgency means they need to become someone new. But psychologically, that's backwards. You're not becoming this parallel self. You're already close enough to it that your mind considers it viable. That's the difference. A year ago, that version of you felt unrealistic. Too far. Too risky. Too abstract. No. It feels plausible, which means the neural pathways required to support it already exist. And when those pathways reach a certain strength, the brain starts favoring them. That's why the old identity starts feeling heavy. Like wearing clothes that don't fit anymore. Not painful. Just wrong. Now let's touch the mystical language, without losing grounding. People describe this as timelines converging, as stepping into alignment, as meeting another version of themselves. Psychologically, what's happening is this. Your internal simulation of the future has updated. Your brain runs constant future models. When one future suddenly feels more emotionally vivid than the others, it gains priority. That vividness feels mystical because it's pre-verbal. It arrives as intuition, not thought. But intuition isn't magic. It's fast pattern recognition informed by experience. And here's the most important part of this section. This urgency isn't trying to rush you. It's trying to prepare you. The discomfort exists so you don't fall asleep inside an identity that no longer fits. And until you acknowledge that, not act, not decide, just acknowledge, the signal won't stop. Which leads us to the part everyone wants to skip. What this actually means for your real life. Your relationships. Your goals. Your daily decisions. Because once identity shifts internally, everything else starts responding. And that's where the real transformation begins. This is the part where everything stops being abstract. Because once this internal shift starts, it doesn't stay contained in your head. It bleeds into your relationships, your motivation, your tolerance for certain situations, your patience, your choices. And this is where people either gain clarity or create chaos. So let's talk about what this urgency actually does to your life when it's left unexamined, and what changes when you understand it. First, let's address the most common symptom people don't recognize as a symptom at all. Decision fatigue. You know what's wild? People going through this identity shift often feel more tired, not because they're doing too much, but because every small decision feels heavier than it used to. What to say, where to go, who to respond to, what to commit to. Why? Because your old identity and emerging identity don't agree on priorities anymore. Your conscious mind is still running the old rulebook. Your subconscious has already updated the values. So every decision creates internal friction. That friction feels like exhaustion. Now look at how this shows up in relationships. You might notice yourself becoming less tolerant of certain dynamics. Not in an angry way. In a quietly done way. Conversations that once felt normal now feel draining. You start holding back, not because you're afraid, but because the exchange no longer feels authentic. Here's the important reframe. This doesn't automatically mean people around you are wrong for you. It means the version of you they relate to is changing. Relationships form around identity contracts, unspoken agreements about who plays what role. When your identity shifts, those contracts strain. That's why people describe feeling like they're outgrowing others. It's not superiority. It's mismatch. And the urgency you feel isn't telling you to cut everyone off. It's alerting you that some connections may need renegotiation or gentle release. Now let's talk about goals, because this is where confusion really spikes. You might notice something unsettling. Goals you worked hard for suddenly feel flat. Not depressing. Just empty. You reach milestones and think, that's it. This freaks people out. They think they've lost ambition or motivation. But look, motivation is identity dependent. You're motivated to pursue goals that confirm who you believe you are. When identity shifts, old goals lose emotional charge. And new goals don't always appear immediately. So you sit in this uncomfortable in-between. Urgency without direction. This is where impulsive decisions happen. People quit jobs overnight. End relationships abruptly. Jump into new identities just to relieve pressure. But that's not what this signal is asking for. Urgency doesn't mean act now. It means pay attention now. Here's another implication people rarely talk about. Your tolerance for misalignment drops. Things you used to brush off start bothering you. Schedules that don't match your energy. Work that feels performative. Social situations that require a mask. Not because you're becoming fragile, but because you're becoming precise. Your nervous system is calibrating to a narrower range of authenticity. And once that happens, pretending costs more. That's why people often describe this phase as restless or irritable. But underneath that irritation is clarity trying to surface. Now here's the big realization most people miss. This urgency isn't pushing you toward a specific outcome. It's pulling you away from incoherence. Away from identities you've already outgrown. Away from decisions you keep justifying but no longer feel. In other words, you're not being called forward. You're being released from something behind you. That's a very different energy. This also explains why forcing yourself to stay grateful or be content doesn't resolve the feeling. Gratitude doesn't override identity mismatch. You can appreciate what you have and still recognize it no longer fits. Both can be true. Now let's zoom into daily decisions, because this is where alignment quietly builds or breaks. You might notice you hesitate before agreeing to things you used to say yes to automatically. You crave more solitude, not isolation. You want fewer but deeper interactions. You're less interested in explaining yourself. These aren't withdrawal symptoms. They're consolidation symptoms. Your system is simplifying, reducing noise so the new identity can stabilize. Here's the aha moment for a lot of people. The discomfort isn't because you don't know who you are. It's because you do, and you haven't fully allowed it yet. The urgency exists because staying the same now requires effort, and becoming different requires honesty. Honesty is harder at first, but it's also relieving. Once people understand this, something shifts. They stop trying to escape the feeling. They stop demanding answers from it. And instead, they start listening differently. Which brings us to the most important part of this entire conversation. What do you actually do with this feeling, without blowing up your life or ignoring yourself? How do you respond in a way that turns urgency into clarity? That's exactly what we're getting into next. Okay, so let's slow this down, because this is where most people either integrate the shift or accidentally sabotage it. The mistake people make is thinking this urgency demands immediate change. Quit the job. End the relationship. Move cities. Reinvent everything. But here's the thing. Urgency isn't asking for action. It's asking for attunement. So instead of doing more, you do something counterintuitive. You listen better. Practice 1. Identity observation, not action yet. For the next few weeks, don't try to become the parallel self. Just observe when it shows up. Notice. What situations make the urgency louder? What environments calm it down? What conversations activate it? What drains it immediately? Here's what's wild. When you stop reacting, the signal gets clearer. This isn't passive. It's data collection. Your subconscious communicates through contrast. So your job is to notice patterns, not fix them. Practice 2. Decode the urgency, ask better questions. Most people ask the wrong question. What should I do? Ask this instead. What version of me feels most at ease in this moment? Ease is important. Not comfort, coherence. When you imagine that parallel self, don't focus on outcomes. Focus on how they move through the world. How do they speak? What do they tolerate less? What do they no longer over-explain? What feels obvious to them now? You're not chasing a future. You're recognizing a present readiness. Practice 3. Alignment experiments. Small, reversible tests. This part is crucial. Instead of dramatic changes, run small experiments. Speak one honest sentence you usually hold back. Say no once without over-justifying. Spend 1 hour doing what feels mentally nourishing instead of productive. Remove one obligation that feels outdated. These are low-risk, high-feedback actions. And here's what you'll notice. The urgency softens when behavior matches identity, even slightly. That's how you know you're on the right path. Practice 4. Regulate before you decide. This one gets overlooked. If your nervous system is dysregulated, tired, overstimulated, emotionally flooded, you'll misinterpret urgency as anxiety. So before big decisions, slow your body down. Reduce stimulation. Create silence. Clarity doesn't shout. It stabilizes. When your body feels safe, the signal becomes calm instead of pressuring. What you'll notice when this works. People expect fireworks. What they get is relief. The urgency doesn't disappear. It transforms. It turns into quiet confidence, cleaner decisions, less tolerance for misalignment, more trust in timing. And eventually, one day, you realize something surprising. That parallel self doesn't feel separate anymore. It just feels like you. And that's how you know the integration has begun. Which brings us to the final piece, tying this all together. So let's bring this home. That urgent feeling about your parallel self? It's not a message from the universe. And it's not your imagination running wild. It's your mind signaling readiness. Readiness for an identity that already fits better than the one you're forcing yourself to maintain. The reason it feels intense isn't because time is running out. It's because misalignment now costs more than change. You've grown. Your nervous system knows it. Your subconscious updated before your conscious story did. And that gap, that's what you're feeling. The urgency isn't asking you to become someone new. It's asking you to stop pretending you're not already changing. When you stop fighting it, when you stop demanding answers, and when you start responding with awareness instead of reaction, the pressure eases. Clarity replaces confusion. Direction replaces urgency. And slowly, the version of you that felt parallel stops feeling distant. It becomes embodied, grounded, normal. Here's the real takeaway. You're not behind. You're not missing anything. And you're not being summoned. You're integrating. And that process doesn't rush. You just finally noticed it. If this resonated, drop a comment about your experience. And subscribe to Echoes Between Worlds for more deep dives like this. Because these moments of awareness, they're not interruptions in your life. They're signals that you're finally aligned enough to hear yourself.